Testa, and welcome to Turning Point, where each show can change the direction in your life. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Peter Saltini. He's an architect practicing in Brooklyn, and he's going to share with us his experiences living on the streets of New York as a homeless person. We're going to find out how it's changed the direction in his life. Peter, welcome to Turning Point.
Thank you, Anne-Renee.
Peter, what made you decide to live on the streets of New York?
Well, it was basically an invitation by some very close friends who started out as clients, who do some wonderful work with the homeless in Yonkers. And there it was also, in part, a fundraising attempt on their part. And so it was a rather expensive stay on the streets, but it was really rather transformational also.
How was it, Peter?
It really shattered a lot of illusions that I had about homelessness. I think that we all harbor the sense that, you know, people have a lot more choice in their life in terms of, you know, their living conditions. And many of the people that we came across and really did live on the street for 4 days, 4 nights, and ate at soup kitchens and missions, and you know, we're basically dressed the part. Our guidelines were that we were allowed to initially take enough money for, I think the limit was $10 for the 4 days. So we did have something available to us. But
did you use it?
We did use all of it, and it was rather remarkable. Most of it was used for the subway. So when people do ask for quarters for the subway, I do believe that a good part of the time they are being truthful, although I have, since my experience, begun giving out tokens rather than quarters, so that they really can't be used for alcohol or drugs or other such things. The subways in New York City are probably one of the more important resources for sleep.
Now, where did you start out?
Okay, we started out, there was a group the first day of about 14 of us, and there was a core of about 8 of us that did the entire period of time. There were some people who did it for several days. And we started out at St. John the Divine, which has a very active homeless sponsorship program. And we were given a brief orientation by several previously homeless people. And they basically, you know, gave us some very caring and very sound advice about what to do, what not to do, what was safe, what was not safe. I think for many of us, really the biggest issue here was really overcoming the fear of being totally unsupported by any of our support mechanisms that most of us have managed to surround ourselves with.
And take for granted.
And take totally for granted.
What were you wearing?
Oh, a pair of, you know, old ripped chino slacks and broken sneakers, an old denim shirt, and it was April, but it was rather cold, so an old ripped ski jacket and a Navy watch cap, and I became rather invisible to most people. Really? Yeah.
Because of the almost repulsive quality of not looking like everyone else, to speak?
Yes, very much so. Not looking like anyone else. And 4 days on the street, you really don't become too obnoxious. But it really becomes an issue of, you really are very much differentiated from other people, and certainly when you attempt to panhandle someone or ask someone for directions or, you know, or just attempt to engage someone in conversation, there's always there is very much a factor of being invisible. And this is one of the most serious complaints of people who do live on the street, that they really have no identity. And and people look through them or past them. And I think that you will find that when you make eye contact with someone, they are thrilled to be engaged. And then after a short period of time, it sort of shuts down because they know most of the time that that's not something that's ongoing.
Yes, it's not consistent. I do that, as I shared with you, I do that every morning with a woman, and she sits there glowering, and then when I say, good morning, and she goes, hi, and her entire persona changes, and then she goes right back into that place, and I wonder what that place is that she goes into. I mean, what did you discover about these people, if you were to think about, you mentioned invisible.
Well, I guess probably the most surprising discovery for me was really for the most part, the gentleness of the people, the willingness to be engaged, the lack of competition in a sense. It was a very docile population, and we were, most of the time we spent around Houston Street and the Bowery, which is, relatively well-known, single, mostly male type of population. And I anticipated, far more violent population. So there was actually, as the days went on, the acts of kindness, the contacts that that other homeless people were established with you were really very, very meaningful. Became far more meaningful than brief encounters in my normal life.
How so?
They became major events of the day. You really are living in existence where you are spending your entire day deciding where to eat, finding a meal, finding a place to sleep if you don't have a permanent place to sleep, which some of the population does, but very few, and also finding a place for hygienic needs. Going to the bathroom is a real serious problem.
How did you solve that?
God bless McDonald's.
Oh.
Many of the missions have bathrooms, and what they do is you line up after, for example, several of the missions you have to sit through a religious service, a Baptist service, a Catholic service, or some other non-sectarian service. And many of the missions have the philosophy that the service that they are providing in terms of feeding people, they assume that it's a holistic point of view, and they are feeding first the soul and then the body, and then they form a line for the bathrooms, basically.
What about showering and things like that?
Few of the places have designated days. For example, there was one place where if you went for lunch on Thursday, then you could sign up for the showers between lunchtime and evening. And they also provided you with a change of clothing, presuming that you could find something that fit suitably. So many of the people, it was very interesting that day, one of the men that I had dinner with really only went there on Thursdays because he knew that he could sign up for showers and usually be early enough to get a shower and a change of clothing. And this was a man that is probably very typical in certain part of that population. I started a conversation with him because he was sitting next to me with a Bible and a Bible dictionary, and I asked him if he came to the mission for Bible lessons, and he said, "Oh, no," and quoted scriptures about how most church members were heretics and so on and so forth. And then we got into a little bit more of where he was from, and he had come from North Carolina 30 years before, had been mostly on the street for virtually that entire time, and I tried to engage him in the difficulties of not having an address, and how did he get any kind of benefits or any, and he basically said that he did not have any kinds of benefits, and he was not interested in any kinds of benefits, and as a matter of fact, he worked, much to my surprise, and he told me he was a cook, and totally dumbfounded. I said, well, where do you cook, and why are you here? And why do you live on the street? He said, well, in June I get on a bus at the Port Authority and I go up to Monticello, New York, and I get a job in the children's camps for the summer. And it's a wonderful place to spend the summer, and the children are wonderful, and the people who run the camps are like my family. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and I don't make very much money, but I manage to save enough money so that I come back and I live on the street, and when it really gets really cold out, I go down to the White House or the Sunshine Palace, which are flop houses, and he pays his $7 or $8 a night for a bed. And this has been his existence for many years. Lovely, very nice man. I'm not in any way objectionable.
So who's to say that the manner in which we live is the best way?
Right.
I mean, it's just a different way.
It's just a different
approach. Did you have a toothbrush?
No. No toothbrush.
Did you have bear's breath?
It got pretty bad.
Did it? Do they provide, does anyone provide for that?
I think that we did not come across places that did provide that. One of the things that's interesting, there are many services that are provided for the homeless. One of the interesting things, I guess initially one of the fears as well, not a fear, I mean in a sense I looked at it as, well, this would be a wonderful opportunity to lose some weight. I figured I'd be spending 4 or 5 days without a meal, and that really was not true. Meals were not at all a problem. It seems that everyone who is committed to helping the homeless feels that, well, we must feed them.
Yes.
And so you could basically get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to the place that serves breakfast at 5, and then the place that serves breakfast at 7:30, and then to the one that serves it at 11:30, and you could then go on to lunch at noon and 1 and so on.
Where was the
you
best
could get
place?
7 or 8 meals a day. Well, it depends on how long a church service you wanted to sit through. If you're into gospel music, the Bowery Mission was wonderful. There are places that serve meals without any religious undertones or without any,
prerequisites.
Prerequisite. I think that one of the interesting things is many of the places, the most popular of the places were the places where there was the most contact established. There were several places where we waited online for sandwiches, and you got to the head of the line, and someone sort of, not looking at you, handed you a sandwich and moved you on. And those lines were rather short. There were people there, and populations tended to seem to be more of an addicted population, whereas the populations that came to the missions seemed to have a little more of a sense of self-preservation.
So was there a sanity? Did you find a thread of grounding throughout the population that you saw? I mean, you saw so many different people.
Anne-Renee, it's really hard to establish that. There was within specific populations of people. What was remarkable in terms of the single male population, it was remarkable to me that the number of people who looked perfectly normal and clean and well kept were there at the missions for meals. I mean, there were a good number of people who seemed as though they could have been working in my office 3 weeks ago and had just lost their job. And there indeed were some circumstances of that kind of economic, immediate economic distress. I think that my experience was that different parts of the city seemed to different populations seem to be drawn to different parts of the city. One night we spent the night in the Port Authority bus terminal, and that was a far more severely mentally anguished group in my perception.
Why
There was,
do you think?
well, I think that I think for many of those people, it's safer than a shelter, than the shelter system, which basically the shelter system that they would have available to them are the large congregate armories, which really are very unsafe, and which we did not. We had intended to experience one night in a shelter like that, and our previously homeless friends said, you should absolutely not do that. A few of us have talked about going back and doing that for a few nights. But it's also the kind of system that this sort of conspires against keeping people together. If there is someone that you travel with, or you've established some relationship with, when you go to one of the referral centers, you are basically randomly assigned a shelter. So you could go there with 3 buddies, and all 4 people could wind up in different shelters, which is, I think, a shortcoming of the system. I think that would seem to me, in the age of computers, to be something that should be able to be very easily changed.
Peter, at the beginning of your experience, what was going through your mind at the time that you shed your normal clothes and you put this clothing on, and what was going through your mind? The mindset that you came to this experience with. You first of all, you were doing this with. There were several other people that were in the group that you did this with. There were how many people?
There were a core of 8 people. And initially, the first day, there were 14 people.
Oh.
And 12 men and 2 women.
Did they stay with it for?
No, not everyone did. There were a few people who did drop out. And I think that it really had to do with I think there were a few people who expected that they could run their lives from phone booths, for example. And it became very apparent very quickly that really was not possible. I think that, and there were several people who basically started the first day knowing that they were not going to be, without the intention of doing the full period of time. There were people who had prior commitments, and the group that organized this had previously accepted that there would be people who would only do it for a day, 2 days.
Who organized it?
Well, it was organized by a group, the Zen community of New York in Yonkers, who are the sponsors of something called Grayston Family Inn, which is a permanent, it's a supportive housing program for previously homeless people. And their perception was that, in the end, any time on the street in that way would have some profound effect on the people. And I think that was true. What was rather remarkable was the cumulative effect of the 4 or 5 days.
So when you look at yourself from day 1 and the manner in which you shed your other life and you went in and transformed slowly but surely, what were you thinking that first day compared to, let's say, the final day?
Well, I think the first morning was really fear and anticipation. I think that was relatively quickly replaced by almost a euphoric feeling of, no constraint, of, in a sense, freedom. And I think that, many of the people that choose what some people refer to as the culturally homeless, I think that there are people there who really choose to live outside of society, outside of the constraints of society. it's remarkable how little money you really need to survive on the streets. You know, with some resourcefulness, you can provide, you know, relatively warm, relatively dry shelter. People do make use of things like the subways and the Port Authority, and I mean, there has been a concerted effort in the last year or so, to change that. And what I found is that people, basically homeless people, learn very quickly to adapt to that. It was interesting to me. We were very often panhandled by homeless ourselves, and they panhandle amongst each other apparently quite profusely.
Really?
And it was always very interesting because the initial reaction of most of the people in the group were to basically respond the way we normally respond, and to look past someone.
Oh.
Well, we had very limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there were a few instances where we did give someone
Mm-hmm.
something. But you basically wind up looking past someone, or not wanting to see them. And then a few of us basically, after I guess the second day, started responding in the way, well, sorry man, I'm down to my last buck and a quarter, and I'm saving that for the subway tonight. And once you establish with someone that you are in the same circumstances they are, then they're all of a sudden developed some sense of camaraderie, where you'd say, we're new to New York City, where do you go, what subway's the best to go? Oh, you've got to take the A train, because the A train takes an hour and a half to go from the Bronx to Coney Island, and you can sleep for an hour and a half without being interrupted, and then you have to get up and get out and stand on the platform till the next train comes so that you can repeat the cycle.
Where did you sleep?
The first night we slept on Elizabeth Street north of Canal Street, and I have to say it will never be the same.
Oh, how was
It was home for a night. There was a construction site with a sidewalk bridge, and it seemed as though it was going to rain the first night, so we sort of scouted out an area and wound up under a portion of the sidewalk bridge in large cardboard tents, provided by the wonderful dumpsters all over the city.
So you went foraging?
We went foraging for cardboard boxes and scraps of carpet and styrofoam to sleep on, and it was cold. It was cold.
And then if you were to, I can't believe we have just a few minutes left, Peter, because there are so many questions I have, and such a vast experience for you. How would you say it transformed your life?
Well, I guess, and that's still occurring. It's, I guess, basically the most profound effect that I know right now is that it really was very liberating. It really it changed the priority of the importance of things, certain kinds of material things in my life, the value of support and the people around you, the value of the contacts that we do have and maintain, the very basics. There's something very profound to be said for living a life where you are only basically finding food, shelter, and and hygienic facilities. So in that sense, there was a sense that you might actually, for some people, you might actually wind up not feeling homeless in a sense, but rather being able to be at home in far many more unlikely places.
Would you do it again?
Than we would imagine. Yes, absolutely.
Why?
Well, I think that there are parts of the experience that really just could not be gotten in the 5 days. There were also basically segments of the population that I continue to work with that I would like to understand better.
And you provide housing.
And we provide housing, and my sense is that you know, we have failed to provide enough housing for this problem to be solved, and that it will not be solved by providing housing in the way that we believe people should live, that we need to develop alternative means of providing for some of this population.
What would be an alternative? We have 30 seconds left.
30 seconds or less. Well, I think that there are some very simple ways to design temporary structures. I think one of the issues, when you're on the street and go through some of the established communities, there's a facility, there's a little community at the bottom of the Manhattan Bridge, for example, where there was a fire recently. I think that the ability to provide some kind of fireproof, minimal structure, cave-like, maybe a shipping container under some of the elevated highways, so that people can establish their own home within some kind of framework that we provide for them, where it can't burn down, where they, you know, where they will not be burnt in the night, and provide some temporary toilet facilities for them. And like I said, food is not a problem.
Peter, I would like to continue our dialogue. I really would,
Thank you,
because this
Anne-Renee.
isn't a half hour, this is a lifetime.
It certainly is.
And I really appreciate Peter Saltini. Thanks for joining me on Turning Point. And remember, experience is not what happens to you, it is what you do with what happens. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.